Hi, this is Fed Senior Financial Contributor to YWO, and we're breaking down the weekly market recap for February 2nd to February 6th of 2026. So lots of things happened this past week and lots of reasons behind them, but let's first highlight them and break them down, and then we'll get into some of the reasons that they happened. So some of the major highlight of this past week was the volatility index, the VIX, which surged over 35%. Now the volatility index does exactly that. It gauges volatility. And when there's a massive sell-off, generally speaking, the volatility index, the VIX, surges. Yes, it's an asset that actually can be traded as well, especially in most platforms. Now, this is super important because it kind of gauges the amount of sell-off that we're experiencing in the market. So what did sell off? So let's break it down by category, starting out with the Forex symbols. We saw the Japanese yen actually gaining versus the US dollar as some of the rest of the major pairs slide and sell off versus the US dollar. Now, yes, if the Japanese yen did gain, that means the US dollar did get weaker versus the Japanese yen. So that's a sell-off for the US dollar. However, on the flip side, there was also a gain for the US dollar versus the British pound and the euro. So that shows some strength versus those two components, but weakness versus the Japanese yen. Now, what fueled this? Obviously, it's the US markets had a lot of pressure. The Dow Jones did slide after initially getting a bounce from the beginning of the week, but the major news was the NASDAQ. Now, the NASDAQ composes mostly the big tech stocks, some of the big names that you know, and they sold off. So namely, which ones specifically? It's Microsoft, it's Nvidia, it's Google, and Tesla, all selling off, besides Apple, which actually gained this past week but didn't have enough of an oomph to kind of save the market onto the upside. Now, looking at some of the commodities that also sold off this past week, it's the precious metals categories, namely silver selling off over 14%, gold, palladium, and platinum all selling off this past week as they had their huge surge, and they're just playing themselves on the upside, but finally breaking. Once it bounced, it broke even further. That was a very important point, and that's called a dead cat bounce technically. Okay, when you get this massive sell-off and then you get this bounce, and that's really a test to kind of see if it's going to correct itself further on the upside, or is it going to break down? And sure enough, we broke down. Now, lastly, we're covering cryptocurrencies as that has gotten slammed over the past couple of months, specifically Bitcoin, XRP, and Solana all selling off quite aggressively. Now, we got to look at the background, the technicals, and also the economic and geopolitical variations of what is contributed to this sell-off. Okay, so a couple of things happening here, namely a little bit of a bubble with AI. Also, some of the economic data isn't so amazing from the United States in terms of some unemployment still lingering in the background. As much as Trump likes to tout that the markets are doing fantastic, there's a little bit of a discrepancy between Main Street and Wall Street, as sometimes reality versus the conceived perception of the market has a little bit of a variance. Now, looking at some of the other economic factors that are leading to this, also we saw precious metals have that huge surge, and that correction had to show up. Okay, right after that, initial surge, we saw a nosedive. Now, it did the same thing as the cryptocurrencies, kind of sold off, get a little bit of a bounce. That dead cat bounce couldn't prove itself and sold off as well. Now, the same thing happened as the markets catch the fever. It's almost across the board, and everything kind of like tests itself to see its resiliency, and that's really the cryptocurrencies jumping into it as well. Now, we also mentioned that there are some geopolitical issues in the world. Certain things are simmering down, but certain things are actually picking up. Between Iran and the United States, a lot of heat coming off over there, and that could put some pressure onto oil and gold, obviously, as things are still up in the air. We're in a very interesting market situation right now, both in the United States domestically and also universally, because it affects everything, right? Everything affects everything. That's one of the things that we kind of take into consideration. So that's the week in recap for February 2nd to February 6th. This is Fred Razak signing off as financial contributor of YWO. I want to wish you guys a great weekend. Thank you.